Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to cut through the noise and bring you the essential insights you need, to really understand what's going on. Today, we're taking a big leap, actually, into the world of elite sports. We're looking at a hidden bias, something that might be shaping who actually makes it to the very top. We're talking about the relative age effect. Our deep dive today is built around some really compelling research, an article titled Relative Age Effect Among World-Class Jump Athletes. It's by Yulin Xia and Hui Zhang from Zhejiang University, published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. We'll give you all the details for that later on if you want to check it out yourself. But for this deep dive, our mission is pretty clear. How could something as simple as, well, your birth month influence an athlete's entire career, especially in a high jump and long jump? Does it open doors for some, maybe close them for others?
Exactly. And we'll explore just how widespread this thing is, how it subtly shifts between genders, across continents even. And maybe the most interesting part, we'll challenge that idea that early success is always the best predictor for making it as a senior athlete. The goal here is really to connect the science, the data, with those aha moments that make you think differently about talent.
Okay, let's do it. So for anyone maybe new to this idea, let's start with the basics. What exactly is this relative age effect, or RAE, as the researchers often call it?
Right. Well, in a nutshell, relative age just highlights the age difference between people grouped together for something, like sports. So imagine a youth team, say everyone's under 12. The
Yeah.
RAE is the bias that happens because some kids in that group are nearly a full year older than others. Within that same competitive age group, like U18, the athletes born earlier in the selection year are simply older. And, crucially, they're often more physically mature than those born later in that same year.
Okay, I get the age difference part.
Yeah.
But why does that gap matter so much in, high-level sports?
Yeah, that's the key question. The leading theory, the one with the most support, is often called the maturation selection hypothesis.
Mhm.
Think about it like this. During adolescence, those early physical advantages, being taller, maybe heavier, having more muscle strength, better speed, they give an athlete a pretty significant edge right then and there. And coaches, well, understandably, they see these immediate physical pluses, and they often equate them with better athletic talent overall. So they tend to favor these, let's call them maturity-advantaged athletes for selection, for extra coaching, for development opportunities.
Ah, okay. So it's less about some kind of deep innate talent that will last and more about who looks the most ready at that specific snapshot in time, because they're further along development-wise.
Precisely. That distinction is really important, and the research consistently shows some general patterns with this RAE thing. It tends to be a bit less pronounced for females than males, generally speaking. It's also usually a stronger influence before adulthood, so its impact on youth selection is pretty significant. Then, as athletes get older, mature physically, that influence often decreases. Sometimes it even becomes negligible once they're adults. Oh, and one more thing, the more popular and competitive a sport is, the more likely you are to see this RAE playing a role. Higher stakes.
Right. Those general patterns make sense. But how does this theory actually play out when we look at these specific athletes? World-class high jumpers and long jumpers. What did Xia and Zhang find in their study?
Yeah, this is where it gets really concrete. They looked at the top 100 world-ranked athletes, a really elite group, and they confirmed pretty unequivocally that RAE is present across all the age groups they looked at, U18, U20, and senior level, and that's for both men and women in both high jump and long jump. So generally, athletes born earlier in the year are overrepresented. They're more likely to be in those top ranks. The only exception they found where RAE was negligible, basically non-existent, was among senior male high jumpers.
Wow. Okay. So widespread, but with that one interesting exception for senior male high jumpers. Are there other differences? Does it look exactly the same for men and women or across the events?
No, definitely not uniform. There are important nuances. For instance, the study confirmed RAE tends to be stronger for males compared to females, pretty much across the board in these jump events. And women's high jump consistently showed the lowest RAE levels, which suggests that for female high jumpers, being born early in the year doesn't give quite the same selection advantage as it might for guys, or maybe in long jump. And another key finding, the impact of RAE really drops off significantly as athletes mature and move into those senior professional categories. So yeah, it's a big factor in youth pathways, but its direct influence seems to lessen somewhat at that very top adult level.
That's really crucial. So if these relatively older athletes are often getting picked early because they're more mature physically, did the study find they actually performed better once they reached these elite U18, U20, or senior levels?
Right, this is where it gets kind of counterintuitive, perhaps. The study found no statistically significant differences in actual athletic performance across the four birth quartiles. So when they divided the year into four chunks, January to March, April to June, and so on, there wasn't a performance difference between those born early versus late, and that held true for U18, U20, and senior athletes.
No way.
Yeah. It suggests that while there might be a bias in getting selected, getting into those ranks, among those who actually make it to that elite level, their performance isn't necessarily better just because they were born earlier.
That's a massive insight.
It really challenges that assumption, doesn't it? That early physical advantage automatically translates into lasting superior talent.
It absolutely does. Okay, so RAE is real. It changes with age, with gender. But what about the bigger picture? Does where an athlete trains or competes make a difference? Did the study find any continental variations?
That's a great question. And yes, they did find some notable differences, especially in men's long jump when they looked at different continents. For the senior group, athletes from the Americas actually had significantly higher performance results compared to athletes from Asia and Europe. And here's the really fascinating link. The Americas also consistently showed the lowest RAE levels in men's long jump during the youth stages, U18 and U20.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, it suggests that maybe a reduced early talent dropout rate, perhaps a more inclusive talent ID system in the Americas for young male long jumpers, might actually contribute to their stronger senior performance later on. It really highlights how those early biases, or lack thereof, can potentially have long-term ripple effects.
That's a powerful connection. It hints that maybe a fairer playing field early on could lead to a stronger overall talent pool at the senior level.
Okay, let's shift to careers then. If you're a young athlete dealing with RAE, what did the study show about making that jump, that transition from youth to senior competition? Well, first off, the transition rates generally weren't super high. From youth levels, U18 and U20, to making it as a successful senior athlete, the rates were roughly between 15% and 36%. Although it's worth noting, this study used quite strict criteria for success, needing at least 2 valid top performances. And using that definition, their transition rates were actually higher than some older research found. But here's the unexpected twist, the really intriguing part, something they call the advantage reversal phenomenon. It's also known as the underdog effect.
An underdog effect. That sounds completely backwards compared to everything we've just said about early advantages. How did that work?
I know, it seems counterintuitive, right? But it means that, despite the initial selection bias favoring older athletes, the relatively younger athletes, those born later in the year, say Q3 or Q4, actually showed higher transition rates into professional careers compared to their relatively older peers born in Q1. This pattern popped up across most events. The main exception was the U18 long jump. And this advantage reversal actually became even more noticeable with age. It was more common in the U20 to senior transition than the U18 to senior transition.
So wait, being relatively younger, facing those disadvantages early, that actually makes you more likely to progress to the senior level, assuming you stick with it.
That seems to be what the data suggests for transition rates, yeah. It's quite a twist.
Why would that happen?
Well, the speculation is that overcoming those early physical disadvantages might build certain qualities. Things like resilience, maybe a stronger work ethic, a more developed ability to excel without relying just on being bigger or stronger early on. They essentially have to learn to succeed under tougher conditions from the start. Interestingly, high jump events showed about a 3% higher advantage reversal than long jump.
Why the difference there?
It might be, and this is interpretation, that the physical development gap creates a bigger initial RAE difference in long jump. Think about raw power and speed being maybe more critical early on there. So perhaps it's just harder for the younger long jumpers to bridge that initial gap, which could lessen that underdog advantage effect specifically in that event. The initial hurdle is just too high for many. They also noted, interestingly, that European athletes, despite generally having higher RAE levels, seem to show a higher change for this advantage reversal compared to other continents. Maybe overcoming that stronger initial bias plays a role. It's complex.
Wow, this deep dive just keeps revealing more layers. Okay, so if these underdogs, the relatively younger athletes, transition more frequently, does that mean youth success doesn't predict adult success? The study looked at this by splitting successful pros into 2 groups, right?
Exactly. This helps clarify the picture even more. They defined 2 groups. All-phase success athletes. Let's call them AS. These were athletes who were successful not just as seniors, but also had significant success during their youth, U18 and or U20. Then there were the senior success athletes, the SS group. These were athletes who only really hit those top levels as seniors without that consistent track record of major youth success based on the study's criteria.
Okay, a really clear distinction, the consistently successful versus the later bloomers. How did RAE look in these two distinct groups?
It was quite telling. The AS group, the ones successful throughout, generally had a higher proportion of relatively older athletes, those born earlier in the year, and this group still showed the presence of RAE.
Ah, so the early advantage was still visible even among the consistently elite.
Right. But the SS group, the ones who found success mainly later on, showed negligible RAE, or sometimes even reversed RAE outcomes. In some cases, you actually had more later-born athletes in the SS group than early-born ones.
Okay, so that split really helps explain things. It shows why RAE is strong in youth sports but seems weaker overall at the senior level because there are these two different pathways to success.
Precisely. It's not just one pipeline. And their careers look different, too.
How so? Were the AS athletes just better across the board?
Well, the AS athletes were consistently about 2 to 3 years younger at each key career milestone compared to the SS group. Younger when they first entered the database, younger when they first qualified for the senior group rankings, and younger when they hit their personal best performance. They progressed faster. And performance-wise, yes, the AS group generally maintained an edge in their best performances. This was especially noticeable in female long jump and male high jump. For male high jumpers specifically, the AS group showed not just higher peak performance, but also more consistent performance overall, looking at their top 10 results average. Though for female high jumpers, while the AS group started stronger, that performance advantage over the SS group seemed to diminish a bit over time.
Okay, so this leads to a really important, maybe slightly complicated question. If the underdog effect helps younger athletes transition more often, but the AS group, often with more older-born athletes, tends to perform better at their peak, what does that ultimately tell us about talent, development, the whole system?
Yeah, it paints a complex, almost paradoxical picture, doesn't it? It suggests that while those relatively younger athletes who manage to persevere might get a reverse advantage in terms of their transition rates, they're more likely to make it to the senior level if they overcome the early hurdles. The AS group, the consistently successful ones, who often include more relatively older athletes, still seem to hold the overall advantage when it comes to peak consistent performance. It really underscores that those technical skills, the strength advantages, maybe even the coaching focus that early developers accumulate, that can be incredibly difficult for the later succeeding SS athletes to completely overcome, even if they are resilient. It also really highlights how those initial selection biases, driven by RAE, might be unintentionally preventing some genuinely talented younger athletes from getting those crucial early developmental opportunities. And that could be limiting their full long-term potential, even if they do eventually break through to the senior level.
Wow. What a genuinely deep dive into how complex athletic talent and development really are. Okay, so for you listening, the key takeaways seem pretty clear. The relative age effect is definitely real and widespread in world-class jump events. It influences who gets identified and selected from a very young age.
And we've seen it's generally more pronounced in males than females, and it tends to decrease as athletes move up to senior levels. And crucially, this fascinating underdog effect exists, where younger athletes might transition at higher rates. But those who achieve success consistently throughout their career, the AS group, often older-born initially, tend to show superior performance at their absolute peak.
Yeah, this study is such a powerful reminder. Early physical maturity, well, it can definitely open doors, but the actual path to elite performance is way more complex. You've got these surprising underdog stories, but also these persistent, almost invisible biases built right into the system. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how we spot talent, how we nurture it, and maybe what potential we're missing.
Absolutely. It poses a really important question for everyone involved in sport coaches, federations, parents. How can our systems adapt? How can we identify and support talent more fairly, really ensure all athletes, regardless of their birth month, get a genuine opportunity to thrive and reach whatever their full potential might be.
Couldn't agree more. If you want to dig into the specifics, the stats, the methods, the deeper discussion, we absolutely recommend reading the full article. Again, it's Relative Age Effect Among World-Class Jump Athletes by Yulin Xia and Hui Zhang, published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. It's volume 24, pages 919, published in 2025. The DOI is https://.doi.org/. Tandem Model 52082 JSSM.2025.9. Definitely worth a read if this sparked your interest. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. If you found this insightful, please do make sure to follow the channel, turn on notifications. That way you won't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of knowledge.